So we're talking about teens specifically.
Yeah.
Okay. You need to be reachable. You need to be available to them. That's the number one thing. I think as we grow up, if we're showing, like you just specifically said, that we're there, we're sitting, we're having the conversation, they've done something wrong, we've given them a consequence, now we go back and have the conversation. All of these things are being reachable. If they see a pattern of that, then they know that they're able to have a conversation with you, understand what happened in that conflict, and now the resolution is this, and let's move ahead from it.
Are they feeling safe? And I think people forget that safety is not just physical or health safety, it's emotional safety. So are they feeling emotional safety with you? Are they feeling respected by you? Because I think there also is still this one-way authoritarian sort of, you do what I say because I'm the grown-up, but is there a respectful discord happening, whatever age your child is, but especially in the teenage years, and connection, right? They're more likely to listen to you if they feel safety, respect, and connection. And I love what you said, because if love feels conditional, any child is going to look for acceptance somewhere else.
If we do not want our boys and young men to find belonging and connection in these toxic spaces, we need to give it to them elsewhere. They need to have it in the real world.
But undistracted, no phones, no TV, just sitting at a table, having an ice cream. And I get everyone is so busy, but we're constantly blaming and shaming these kids, and we're not seeing where the respect is, that we need to be adults.
Yeah.
We need to become adults again and have those conversations with them. Again, I'm saying conversations, but it's more of a listening tactic.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Mona. Today we're diving into the haunting and powerful Netflix series, Adolescence. So many of you reached out saying, I watched it, I was shocked, I was moved, but now what do I do with these big feelings and what I just saw? So whether you're raising a boy or a girl, whether your child is an adolescent or not yet, this show focuses and forces us to reckon with disconnection, violence, and parenting in the digital age. And so much conversation is going to come out of today's episode. We see Jamie, a child, he's 13, in pajamas, eating cornflakes or wanting cornflakes at the police station with a teddy bear in his room, commit an unthinkable act. It's gutting, and it begs the question, how does a child, because he is a child, unravel like this? And joining me today are two brilliant guests. So Ruth Whippman, she's a 3-time returning guest, okay? She's been on my show for the 3rd time now, a journalist, cultural critic, and the author of Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. I got to grab the book really quickly from my bookcase right here. Let's see, before I knock the bookcase down. Am I going to knock it down? No, here we go.
Oh, I like that. It's right to hand.
It's right to hand. And so she was on my show already. We have talked about raising boys in the age of toxic masculinity. We talked about the intersect of masculinity and politics. And now she's joining me to talk about adolescence and why it's so powerful. But I also wanted to grab Dr. Zabina Bhasin, also known as Dr. Z. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, founder of Listen to the Kids, and a bold voice for youth empowerment and cultural change. Through Listen to the Kids, she leads a movement rooted in listening-based leadership, helping adults create spaces where children feel seen, heard, and valued. And we are going to be diving into the show. We are going to answer a lot of the questions you all had, a lot of the feelings we all had watching this series, which was just 4 episodes, but was so powerful, to the point that my husband and I were crying on the couch together, processing it. And I was like, we need to bring this to my podcast. So let's get into it. But before we do, off the bat, if you want to introduce yourself, but also just your general feelings about the show before we get into it.
I think for me, Adolescence and multiple shows that are out there right now, what it is affecting is that this isn't something that has happened now. This is culturally, we've seen masculinity in many cultures around the globe. And I think what this has brought, the show, is the forefront that we've got to deal with it now.
Yeah.
We've seen it within our homes. Culturally, in South Asian families, it's been there all the time. I think most Southeast Asians, maybe even, other countries as well. But I know growing up, I saw that. I have 4 brothers. It's a very common place where then we see narcissism a lot within the male culture as well. So I think for me specifically, this was this outpouring of parents and adults and teachers and coaches and mentors saying, oh my God, this is real. And now it's really showing us. So for me, I was like, yes, because I'm constantly talking about this culture and changing it. And not just for men, but for women and for young girls and boys. But now it's like, hey, we have something that shows us this is happening. because it has been there for centuries. But today is the thing. And Ruth, I'm ready to get your book because I'm like, you've already written about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I thought the show, like as a piece of art, as a piece of television, acting, performances, I thought it was absolutely stunning, as did many people. And I think it touched on so many. I think it was very nuanced in the way that it touched on many, many different issues. It wasn't like blame the parents, blame the influencers.
Yeah.
It was just like looking at the round at a range of things that are like affecting young boys today, and they're kind of coming together in this really fraught cultural moment. So it's partly parenting, it's partly schools, it's masculinity norms, it's generational trauma, it's screens, it's influencers, it's all of these things. I've got to say that I think, as a piece of television, it's wonderful. I think parents are like so alarmed because that was like basically a good, loving family. They had their flaws, and I think that this idea that that you can have a kid that's like in a very good, loving family, and overnight he becomes a murderer. I think that's a little bit far-fetched. I don't think when you look at these cases in real life, that's exactly what's going on. I think there's usually multiple complicated. I think they're usually from very, very complicated families and backgrounds. So I want to reassure parents a little bit.
Yes,
but so many of the cultural phenomena that I reported on in Boy Mom, when it comes to masculinity norms, the pressures on boys, the pressures on girls, normalized misogyny, screens, and how they all play into each other, I think were touched on in that show in a really, really beautiful and chilling way.
That's exactly how I feel. And I mean, my thoughts will come through when I ask you guys the questions that I have for you. We'll go like section by section. I kind of organize this by my feelings and episode by episode. Like, what are the big themes that I saw? The show was inspired by real life knife crimes in the United Kingdom. So there were some deaths of Ava White, Eliane Andam, and Brianna Gay. And this was something that I researched after watching the series, like what came up with this inspiration. This is obviously a fictional story based on kind of the events as a reminder. And they wanted to examine the modern male masculinity, rage, influence of figures like Andrew Tate, which was never named but alluded to, just to be clear, and just kind of figuring out, what was the impact of all of this with these children in their culture. And like you said beautifully, Ruth, it's not just one thing. I love that this show in only four episodes went through the school system and the way that the teachers interacted. They went to the sibling relationships. They went to the parent relationships. Like you said, the generational trauma. That's what was so powerful to me. And you said it beautifully that I don't think parents need to like, oh my God, I'm doing everything right and my kid's going to murder someone tomorrow. But let's talk about this first for Dr. Z. From your perspective, what is it about this moment in time that makes boys especially vulnerable to messages of anger, dominance, and violence, maybe from what they're seeing online or through others?
So I think I want to go back to Ruth's comment as well, which is like, we have to look at each family dynamic, right? Let's make sure we understand that. But boys in general have an overstimulation and they're emotionally starved. I'm not saying girls aren't, but there is a place where young boys in the age ranges of 8 to 14 years old have this place where they're bombarded by messages that are powerful and more louder than young girls are. And that's a vulnerability and a weakness for them. They don't want to look at that. Many boys don't, and many men don't, especially. But this crisis is what is really raging, this male dominance of, hey, you have to act like this, you have to talk like this, you have to be like this. And with the perspective of social media, YouTube, these video games, and a lot of places where you see this constant conversation with young boys, you'll definitely see that they don't feel seen around the adults that they're living with, or teachers or coaches. Their loudest voices are the online voices that they hear constantly. And many of these offer them powerful, over the top, instead of peaceful type of conversations. And that's why we really say, and I really say all the time, is we've got to do this real listening and watching of our kids. Even as teachers and parents, is like, what are they watching? What are they hearing? And I think that messaging to them creates this dominance of powerful and violent type of structures. Again, I'm not saying this is every household, but there is a perspective of that. Now, if it's not at home or in social media, it's their peers. Mm-hmm. Their other peers are having conversations with them in that aspect. Or it could be in sports. I mean, I'm a basketball coach. I coach girls basketball. I know what that conversation is. I did this my first year as summer league for young boys. And you hear the difference and when girls talk at that age of 6, 7, 9, and 11 versus when a boy talks and they're having that car. It is the outside perspective. And again, we still have to be adults to give them those guidances. And I think that is where they see those vulnerabilities because of their powerful level of their mind wanting to overstimulate and work.
And before I get to Ruth on the similar question, is why do we think that there's that difference, right? You see that when you're coaching the girls versus the boys. Is it pressure? Is it just pressure from what their peers are saying? Is it something to do with their own development from being male or female, biological? Like, where can we put an answer to that on the origin of why there's a difference?
So here's the thing.
We're not three females sit here.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're a physician as well. So like biologically, men and women and girls and boys are different biologically. Yeah. Like, okay, there is strength, there is testosterone, but psychologically also, we have to recognize they're different too. They have a place of warmth, empathy, and emotion. I'm not saying boys are not like that, but generally psychologically, you will see more and more young girls who have that perspective.
Yeah.
I have seen many boys who have that perspective as well, but they're being torn down to not have that feeling. And it's outside stimulants that do that. I mean, there are many boys in practice who were kind and generous and wanted to pass the ball and want to give back. But then you have these do not do that. You're played. I'm giving you basic words. Like, kids are told, don't do that, or someone's going to stomp over you, or someone's going to, look over you, or girls are going to take advantage of you. What are these conversations? But they're psychologically manipulated to think that way. Yes, they are psychologically different. Girls and boys are. We have to recognize that. But that doesn't mean they can't have those perspectives equally as well.
I think this might be a good segue to Ruth, because in Boy Mom, you talk about how traditional ideals of masculinity isolate boys emotionally. So when I was watching Adolescence, I kept thinking these boys aren't just angry, right? Not only in the school system, but Jamie, they're lonely. And I mean, there's so many examples that we can go through, but have we created a culture, and how have we done that, where boys lack the emotional tools and the community they need, leading to this increased loneliness?
Yeah, I mean, I think the phrase that Dr. Z said that really just stood out for me, and I just stand behind so much, is that boys are emotionally starved. And I think this is a process that starts at birth. And in a way, the kind of biological differences, for how much is nature, how much is nurture. In a way, I think, there are differences that are rooted in nature. And if anything, they are more to do with boys being more vulnerable than girls at birth rather than less vulnerable. It's needing more emotional sensitivity, more nurture, more, a baby boy is born with the right hemisphere of his brain around a month to 6 weeks behind a baby girl's in development. And that's in the sort of right hemisphere, which deals with like emotions, emotional self-regulation. So they start off a little bit behind, but right from birth, we have this process where we kind of masculinize boys. We starve them of emotional contact. There's all these sort of studies that support that girls get a little more nurturing care from parents and other adults. We're more sympathetic with their emotions. We're more sympathetic with, we give them more kind of nurturing, positive touch as a rule. And over time, these build up. And I think that we do not give boys the social permission or the tools to be emotionally vulnerable and to express like these big feelings in ways other than anger. We give them anger as their only option. And then we fail to teach them these social, emotional, and relational skills as they go on. So there's a little bit under-nurtured and a little bit starved of that kind of education in emotions and emotional self-regulation. And then we give them all these messages, just, it's from the masculinity influences, but it's also from the superheroes and from all the stories that we see about battles and all the stories about toughness, just very, very normal things that happen in most households, which is like, be tough, be strong, be a superhero, don't be vulnerable, don't show weakness. And, by the time the Andrew Tates of this world and the algorithms and the YouTube videos come along, boys are already primed to receive those messages, to see that as the measure of their worth, their physical toughness and, their need to be dominant. And I think, my son is in middle school and you can see it now. Boyhood is quite a hostile environment,
Right.
The norm is like trash talk and insults and banter. And it's like, whereas the social norm for girls is like, let's support each other, let's comfort each other, let's be vulnerable together. And that's not to say like boys are mean and girls are kind. I don't think that's the case. It's more about the social norms that we hold them to.
Right.
And, I think that it's no wonder in a way that boys use the tools of anger to express themselves.
It was something that happened yesterday. It was just so mind-blowing that you just mentioned this, Ruth. My son had a bunch of kids over for Easter yesterday, and I was in my bedroom and I could hear them in the backyard. And he goes, "I'm not a servant. I'm a man." And it blew me away because you're 7. And I'm thinking, holy crap, where'd that come from?
Yeah, yeah.
He doesn't have social media. He doesn't have it. Yeah, and I'm like,
but it comes from everywhere. It comes from absolutely everywhere all the time. Right. And it's like invisible to us because, girls get these stories of like friendship and nurture and caring, and boys get these stories of dominance and battles and fighting. It's just absolutely baseline in our culture. So in a way, it's no wonder that they pick that up,
Well, yeah. And then I think I was going to add on to that was like, I don't know about any of your cultures, but in our household, sometimes I remember hearing my mom or my dad say, "Oh, don't make him softy and don't make him a pansy. Don't make him this." Like my husband has said it a couple times. And I was like, you can because you're, and there is a space. And I think we have to discuss this at some point is a mother really does feed into her son's emotional, buckets, right? Where sometimes as daughters, we have those, not that greatest connection with our mother, but we have it with our fathers. There is a space that we need to discuss that at a point because fathers will tend to say, "Oh, don't make him a mama's boy. Don't do this. Don't do that." And that's within your own household. You're not recognizing those words that you're saying.
Yeah.
And that also removes from their emotional bucket. Emotional dysregulation is a huge part of young men growing up, to not have that. And then what they expect is not to have consequences and also not to have the fact that they can do what they want, but not express how they're feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a place that we need to have and time being a conversation that our boys need to recognize they have to show their emotions and talk about them.
And me and Ruth have spoken about that on our other episode, and I've shared stories about in my office, right? Like I see this culture, I see the difference between parenting of boys and girls and the stop being a baby, stop being a little girl, the verbiage that parents use, not in front of their child, but the PUSSY, like you're being a little PUSSY. Like that is already derogatory because you're using a female derogatory anatomy term to describe your boy having feelings, right? I mean, already there's so many levels of that. But that is a huge issue that, again, I agree from the parenting pediatric sense of what I see in my office and also me raising a boy and a girl. You brought up the nature versus nurture, Ruth, about what is it? And I see nature-wise, my children are very different. My daughter is very nurturing, and we are very nurturing parents, right? We are nurturing our son the same way, but by just like innate desire, she's the one who wants to go over to her dolls without being prompted and just start cuddling with them or start to feed them a bottle when those same dolls are there. And my son likes to play with it, but then he likes to take his car and ram it over. And so a lot of our teaching is, "Oh, do we do that with the baby?" And he sees very nurturing father, he sees a nurturing mother, but it's taking the biology, which we know to be true, that boys like to roughhouse and be like that, and maybe they're into superheroes, but also how can we foster the same sort of emotional vulnerability and being okay with that, teaching that we do not ride a truck over a doll and, all this stuff. And yes, I'm not trying to make him nurture a doll like my daughter does, nor am I trying to make my daughter do things that maybe she doesn't want to do, but like you can still teach sort of normal etiquette. But the biggest bottom line, and I agree, is that we are not allowing boys, especially girls too, but boys more so than girls, to have that emotional vulnerability because of the stigma and the you're going to be a little girl and you're acting like a little girl or you're acting like a PUSSY. And that is coming from generations above us. And that is coming from many fathers. And I don't see a lot of women feel this, but the dads, like my own husband who is a South Asian father, he feels it because he grew up in that sort of toxic masculinity culture where he's like, "Mona, are you sure that we should be doing this?" Like sometimes he just cries for stupid reasons. I'm like, I cry for stupid reasons and no one taught me how to learn about that. So we are teaching him so that when he's 20 years old, he won't cry about this stupid reason. He will learn to cope because he'll have coping skills. Like he's not going to learn it unless a parent, an adult in his life is teaching him that we're okay feeling the feelings, that you are feeling lonely, you are feeling unattached, you are feeling you didn't like that mommy left today, that went to like a work event. What are we doing with these feelings? And that lack of what is the feeling? how are we coping with it is not being taught to many children, but I think more so with boys because of the messaging we get, for sure.
Yeah,
And
totally.
that's a hard reality. And I want to go into like episode 2 because we're bringing this to like the culture at school that, Ruth, you alluded to that. It's not just one thing here. So in episode 2, we see the detectives or the police officers go to Jamie's school, and the staff, I think a lot of it could be due to stress, but they're cold, they're impatient. The students are joking about the murder. Like one of the boys was like laughing. Another boy gets beat up. He's being mocked by like the fact that a girl like kicked him. And it's more than just, to me, boys being boys. There's something deeper going on. It raised for me the question, are they being boys that they like to just roughhouse and goof around? Or are we watching something more disturbing, something cultural that's being passed down, reinforced, and rewarded? Like the way I saw the girl get emotional losing her friend, you saw that the connection was so important to her, right? That she lost her best friend and she felt sad, and then she walked across the street alone. The show depicted a woman feeling sad because she felt disconnect, like losing someone she connected with, whereas the boys were just, okay, she just died, whatever. Like it seemed so, the juxtaposition just seems so there for me. So Dr. Z, developmentally, what's normal behavior here? Like, is that typical that you see of boys, and what's a red flag? But how can we really start shifting group dynamics earlier in these school settings and shutting this down, or do we let it happen, or what should we be doing here?
So the myth is that, and it's a very dangerous myth, is that boys shut down, they mock others, and they're joking, like you said, or about violence, or that this is developmentally normal. Boys will be boys, right? That's what we were saying. It is not. This is not the truth.
Yeah.
As a psychiatrist and also as a physician, you've probably also seen that behaviors that we see, detachment, ridicule, suppression, these are all red flags. And these are large systematic problems. These are not developmentally normal. What we are seeing actually isn't biological. It's called behavioral conditioning, right? Mm-hmm. So in behavioral conditioning, boys are learning early and often that their emotional distance equals the social survival that they need to put out there. Now, I'm being very constricted to a psychiatric type of thing. So when we say that is when they mock someone or they mock grief or they say, oh, it's no big deal, someone just died, move on, that kind of feeling, that is them having an emotional armor. Like you're protecting your emotional feelings. But let's go back to it. They've either seen that, they've been taught that, or they see it within their peers. I'm going to give a very simple example going back to something Ruth was saying. Her own son or my son, where I see a lot of emotional dysregulation in him that, he's working with someone, but he goes, oh, his grandfather passed away. He's like, he was old, he died. And I see my daughter who's having this, and I'm not saying it's wrong or another, but we had to sit down and have that conversation. Yeah. But what's interesting is when our dog died, he still, and this was in May of last year, he still hasn't been able to deal with that. Mm. But it was something that his father didn't have a moment with him. Like my father passed away. Now, over time, this armor becomes hardwired into them, right? It's how the world they see and how they see themselves. And then what I've always seen also is there's this shift of dynamics where we need to intervene. And, before middle school or before high school. So in kindergarten, I've worked with kids in preschool and kindergarten where we're teaching them emotional literacy, where we're giving them active listening, where we're relating accountability to their emotions and their feelings. Again, going back to the grandfather passing or, in this middle school arena, if the parents or the schools, so this is where my other issue is the schools don't have these conversations.
Yeah.
Even when we have school shootings, we do it for a temporary basis.
Yeah.
This needs to be an ongoing, continuous conversation. And programs that are built not only for the emotional regulate or, for the kids have to help the adults. Because if we're not teaching us ourselves as adults, then we are not having a safe expression for the kids to have a place like that. So that's my thought within the cultural aspect of it, where boys have to have a space of that. Again, there are girls out there. I do want to really emphasize, we're not just talking about one gender here.
Yes.
There are girls who are raised in that specific place as well, where they're not regulating their emotions as well. And we have to give them that. And that comes from a home life or a cultural life as well.
Ruth, what are your feelings about that in terms of that mocking vulnerability dynamic? Is this something that we're culturally modeling, boys versus girls? And I love that you just talked about how this is not just a conversation about boys, because we do get into a lot more of that in this episode about how this is applicable to all boys and girls. But what do you see in that, Ruth, in terms of that mocking vulnerability or that dynamic that we see in young boys?
I mean, I interviewed many, many boys for research for Boy Mom, mainly adolescent boys and kind of college age boys. And they all said this across the board, which is just like, they cannot show weakness. They cannot, they all used the same phrase actually, which was really an interesting one, which was like, you can never let your guard down. And, kids are really different, like everything from very, very privileged kids to kids who are living in really difficult situations were saying the same thing. You can never let your guard down. It's like this performance of masculinity. You've got to be tough. And it's this banter, this trash talk often. It's like insult after insult after insult. And it's like, or like mock. You can't be shown to care about anything. You can't be shown to, you can't show weakness. And I think, yes, there's a little bit of this for girls and for teenagers in general, but I think culturally girls, like I see this, I coming back to my son on his school trip. He's on a week-long residential school trip at the moment in 8th grade. And the girls are like, they cry in front of each other. They support each other. If someone's having a hard time, that is culturally normal for them. Whereas the boys, it's just like this rigid, you cannot show a moment of weakness. And it's really stressful for him. And I think he's really, and he's quite a sensitive boy. And, everybody experiences this in different ways. But I think it's just like, it's very hard to form deep connections with another human being if you can never show them vulnerability. So I think there is this epidemic of loneliness with young men in particular and with older men. And I think this is a big part of it. And this is what the boys were telling me over and over. It's like they have mates, they have friends. It's not like they're isolated, although many of them are isolated. Many of them do have friends. They have people to hang out with, but they can never show that vulnerable self to them. And it really gets in the way of a deep connection.
And I think that scene with Jade, so Jade was like the best friend of Katie who died, right? So she was the one that was being interviewed, and she was very sad. And she then was talking to, I believe, a therapist or a teacher at the school, and she was very overwhelmed. And then she was walking alone. Like to me, that scene really embodied what you just described as that female connection of feeling so connected to a friend. And that's not to say that if a male had died, what would have been the reaction? I have no idea. But I think that scene, and especially her walking alone, I'm very big on cinema. Like that was intentional to show her walking alone
Absolutely.
after her friend had died, how sad she was. Yeah.
Right. And it's really, this is something that like I looked at a lot in the book, which is like these cultural representations of friendship in books and movies and TV shows. And there are, hundreds upon hundreds of representations of girls having these very emotionally intimate friendships, and in books and movies, and it's very normal. That's just culturally extremely normal. And with boys, you see, and it's interesting that Dr. Z mentioned her son and the dog. It's like you see cultural representations of boys being friends with an animal a lot, or boys being friends with a girl. But like really intimate portrayals of male friendship where two boys are friends with each other. I've asked around so much, I asked a woman who covers books for the LA Times, children's books for the LA Times yesterday. I was like, can you think of a single one? People keep asking me for examples of this. And she was like, racking her brain. No, I cannot. And I think, it would have been hard to imagine, like the movie Inside Out, there's this girl and we're all, you could see this sort of deep emotional like vulnerability between girls and tracking each other's emotions. It's really hard to imagine a boy character in that role. It's hard to imagine a boy character, in the role of the best friend. I think it would have been portrayed very differently had it been a boy who'd lost his best friend,
Well, I think if we go back to that too, is medically speaking, boys and girls they're born with the same emotions. They don't come out differently. Right? But that's exactly what you're saying. But by the time they hit a puberty or pre-pubertal or like an adolescence age, they've been socialized to it, right? I think that's what I'm hearing, Ruth, and I agree with you, is that we're just seeing a gender difference, and these have cultural consequences to us,
really
societally. I don't care where we come from. This is going to create a huge difference of opinion. I remember fighting for the fact of, physical abuse in marriage between men and women, and then having this as our thesis. We were writing about why does it happen that men are the abusers so consistently, not always, but But there is that growth from that age group when they're in their, 13, 14, 15, seeing something that is happening. By the time kids hit their puberty level, especially boys, they have now internalized these messages. And so girls technically, like we see with Jade, has it, right?
Yeah.
We see the sadness in her.
Yeah.
So is this typical? No, it's trained, right? And that's the change we have to do as adults, or as parents, or as teachers, is untrain that, or untrain ourselves first.
In the show, you could see the difference between the relationship between the mom and the sister versus the dad and the son. And the mom and the sister, there's a scene where they're sitting side by side in the bedroom, they're talking, they're sharing, they're like talking about their feelings, they're like they're emotionally open, they're talking about stuff. Whereas the dad, you can see like, this is a loving dad, and he's not a bad dad. But you could just see, just all the way through the police station, all the way through the thing, he just cannot talk to his son about what's going on. It's just this silent stoicism. They're like, you remember his face when his son was being examined and strip searched, and he's just got this like face which is just teeming with emotions, but he can't express them. All he has available to him is rage. And that's what he learned from his father. That's the only thing in his emotional toolkit. And it's, you can see how that's handed down from his father to Jamie's dad to Jamie. That's all they have when things feel bad and feel wrong, and the contrast with the mom and the sister is pretty stark.
Well, the kids call it toughing it out, right? Because we haven't normalized grief. It's tough it out. Make sure. I mean, I hear that so much with boys. I have to tough it out. I have to be strong. Even with young boys that are 6, 7, 9, 11 years old, I have constantly heard that. But because if they show their emotion or support for someone else, that is no, we're not. But I do want to go back to one point, Ruth, you said about boys having relationship with boys to build like that. You know how we say sisterhood?
Yes.
I have actually been focusing when we see kids is like a brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
But when you call it in adult world, I don't know if you guys know this, the bromances. Oh, he's got a bro. It's been made fun of.
Yeah.
We also as women are not normalizing that. We're making fun of it, or men make fun of it. But as children, if they keep hearing that you could have a brotherhood, is great. Now, I do want to make one really point here is it's unfortunate because in lower socioeconomic classes where we see that boys do go towards other boys to have a secure feeling, that level, they're still not allowed to be emotionally normal. That's where the gangs and these other effects come in because they're looking for a manhood.
Yes.
Outside of Andrew Tate, let me just explain to you, when I say we go back another 20 years, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, growing up in Southern California, especially in Norwalk and South Central LA, we saw this already. The manhood piece was you have to join a gang or you have to be protected. And that's how so this man masculinity or toxic masculinity that young boys are seeing now, young boys at that time saw it very clearly. There was no out from that. So again, let's know that this isn't new. It's just in a new format that it's been put out,
And I think,
and you had to do that.
Yeah, and I think I feel like every grown-up that is responsible for caring for a child, we should all take a parenting course that talks about, hey, we are going to teach about emotional intelligence to the developmental capacity of our child, and this is important for boys and girls. I know that's not a pact that I can get everyone to do, but I think it's important because I know. I mean, I'm in. And again, we say boys and girls because it's not just a boy problem. But we know that culturally it leans more towards boys having the issue. And going back to this mocking of vulnerability, right? These boys in the school, when we are teaching them that that's okay, they just start internalizing this idea that feeling anything makes them weak. But we know that the truth is that when we respect their emotions, when we model that it's safe to cry, like using your example of the dad, he finally cried when he realized that of what he did, right? But before that, it's safe to cry. It's safe to care. It's safe to connect. We give them tools to belong and not having to feel like they have to dominate. And I think you've talked about this too, Ruth, is that, we've spoken so much about what it is about what we don't want for the boys, right? We don't want this toxic masculinity, but we haven't given boys a new model of what it means to be a man, right? We've torn down the old notions of we don't want the stoicism dominance, but we haven't replaced it with something meaningful or figures out there that are going to say, hey, let's have belonging, let's have identity, let's have self-worth in the right places. Like, you talk about a boyhood. One thing that comes to mind is in Dallas, there's these men that do stroller walks. Okay. They're
Yeah,
fathers and they do stroller walks. And
I
I
love
think
that.
I love that. Like I saw that story and I love that it's being a story, right? Because women can sometimes look at that and be like, how come we don't get the press when we go on stroller walks? We need the press to show that men are capable of doing that, that is not girly, that is awesome, that dads can connect with other dads by pushing a stroller and taking care of their kids. Let's show these boys what it means to be real men without, saying that you can still be strong. We're all strong. I think the biggest strength we have is being emotionally healthy and also being able to go through our feelings. But that label of like, nope, you're weak, you're weak, you're weak,
Right.
that feeling of shame, right? We're not helping them cope. We need to offer them a version of masculinity that's rooted in connection instead of control, because I think this is out of what's happening so much now. And vulnerability will then become strength and not weakness, right? That you are in control because you are connected, whether it's to me, your guardian, whether it's to your friend, that's your one guy friend, whether it's a girlfriend of yours that you really connect with, and that it's okay to be able to talk about those real feelings. And it's so hard to see that. I love feeling discussions. I am that type of person. And I want that for both my son and my daughter, whether one of them is going to just be more aligned to it than not. It's just so important to see. And we all should have that pact. Let's just raise these kids with like emotional safety. That's what I want for these boys.
Yeah.
Emotional safety.
What was really interesting to me with the boys that I interviewed was that, I thought that they would just say, oh, we don't want that kind of friendship. Like, we don't want to sit around and talk about our feelings. We don't want, and, we like to do it our own way. But actually, that wasn't what they were saying at all. They were like, we are starved of this kind of, once you scratch the surface and they feel it's safe to admit that, then they felt like they would love to have someone to listen to their feelings. They would love to have support. They would love to have that connection. And maybe they don't know it when they're 7 or 14 or whatever, but by the time they were late adolescents, they were like, really felt the lack of it and were really sad about it,
And I think that's the work we have to do now. I think it goes back to what you're saying, Mona, is most importantly is, and this is why we're launching what we're doing, is we've got to start having them that opportunity to listen to them unjudgmentally, not asking them questions and just letting them, like us, we need to vent sometimes as adults. So do kids. 7-year-old kids do, 6-year-old kids do. But we need to just be quiet and listen and let them just sit out their feelings. Then we are only going to know how to guide them in the right direction. Here's the other thing I think we have forgotten culturally. If we look at generations before us, people always want to fix things, as parents, as teachers, as coaches. We just want to walk in and be like, here, this is how you do it. Now go do it. But that's not always for every kid the same way, whether we're talking at a boy or a girl. I remember one part, and if I'm not mistaken, Jamie was just sitting there, and the moment he just wasn't sad, right? You didn't see him sad at all, but he was mirroring an emotion or for what he saw, right? What he was saying. And I think that for me is what nobody heard him before. Nobody sat down and had a conversation with him. Again, this is a show, right? But in real life that happens. Unless we think, oh, our kid needs to go see someone and talk to them. Well, the easiest way for adults and parents to do it is just to sit down and start with lists of questions that are already out there that doctors have given you. But undistracted, no phones, no TV, just sitting at a table, having an ice cream. And I get everyone is so busy, but we're constantly blaming and shaming these kids, and we're not seeing where the respect is that we need to be adults.
Yeah.
We need to become adults again and have those conversations with them. Again, I'm saying conversations, but it's more of a listening tactic. We have to go back and listen to them so they have that space to sit down and have their emotions. I want to go back to one thing you said about fathers actually, whether it's showing their emotions. I don't know if you saw a 60 Minutes the other day, the Bugaboo chief executive's husband and wife. She is a chief executive, or she's not the CEO, but she's a big executive there. Her husband is a stay-at-home dad. Full-fledged stay-at-home dad raising both kids. And he's seen the backlash of being a father staying at home, being like, what are you doing? Be a man. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Be a man. Like, I really want to ask that question over and over again to society is, what are we trying to say? What is it being a man? Because that is what we're showing our young boys. And he was like, I am a man. I'm raising my kids. We have a one household income. I'm home doing homework with them. I'm feeding them, and I'm taking care of my family.
Right.
Do I need to have an income at a high level just to say that I'm a man? He goes, I'm doing it all. Yeah. And a lot of the Danish do that way too. There's a lot of European nations who actually have stay-at-home dads as the great thing. It went back to your stroller thing. That's the point. My husband is constantly telling me, it's like, you travel, I travel all the time. My husband says this all the time. We're a team, guys. It's not one or the other doing something.
Yeah, my husband wants to be a stay-at-home dad, and I'm like, let's do it. Let's figure out a way to make this happen, because I'm like, you burnt out from your job. I love mine, and you're good at it too. What do you think? So I want to ask you, Dr. Z, and then I'll ask you, Ruth, the same question. What, in your dream, what would healthy masculinity look like in 2025? Like, what do you think you would want
that's
for,
a great question.
yeah,
I think I would want for healthy masculinity to be where there is not a place that boys feel like or girls feel like they can't have an emotional feeling. It doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
Angry, happy, sad, frustrated, argumentative, not being called a bitch because you're being bossy. I mean, or a boy crying and being called, the pussy word. Yeah. I want it to be normalized where you could feel anything. And a father, grandfather, uncle, whoever it is, will show that same emotion, and a boy could feel like, I can do what I need to do.
Gosh, how do we get all this generations involved? Listen to this episode, right? Ruth, what would you add for your dream for 2025, if we could?
Well, funny enough, I prefer when we're talking about how to raise boys. I'm not as keen on the framing of healthy masculinity in general, because I think it just sometimes ends up reinforcing this idea that masculinity is the most important thing. Like, it's so important to be masculine. So I would rather just, rather than saying that certain traits are masculine and certain traits are feminine, that it's like, I think all humans need all of these things. We all need to be strong and ambitious and to have agency and these like traditionally masculine coded things. We all need empathy, vulnerability, relationships, caregiving, all the sort of more feminine coded things. I'd rather we saw it as kind of full humanity and we allow kids of all genders access to all of it, rather than reinforcing this masculinity paradigm over and over. But in terms of what I want to see for boys, absolutely, I want boys to have the tools and the social permission to show up as their full vulnerable selves, to be able to take care of their own emotions and to take care of other people's emotions, to show up for their friends and to have their friends show up for them in those ways, and to have access to all these other things as well, like strength and toughness, and and for kids of all genders to have courage, bravery, all those traits, for kids of all genders to have access to the full spectrum of human flourishing.
I have a dear friend, Eve Rodsky, and she wrote the book Fair Play.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when the book came out, it was early 2018, 2019. She came up with these cards and she sent them to all her friends to use at home. And my husband and I sat down, and my husband at that time, I love saying this story because he was very South Asian masculine like that. I mean, and I say this comes in every culture. It's not just ours, but in multiple cultures, you see that, the man who takes care of the house so when he and I sat down to do the game, it was, what is fair in the household that we do? And I kept putting the cards and doing this. And he was just like, wow, I didn't realize just these little things. And he said, because our kids were young at that time, he was like, I don't want Zane to think that he can just bow out of everything.
Yeah.
And that for me was so eye-opening. And that change is literally that 2025 of like, or moving into the future, that men see that these are the little changes that we need to make to create healthy humanity, right? A woman can do anything a man can do, and a man can do it, or any gender can do any gender. Like, again, going back to gender, we don't know what gender exclusivity, like what is inclusivity, is, because we want to make sure everyone just feels equal. And those little pieces are what will help us, is by adults showing the youth and the young that you can do this. If dad can cook dinner, mom can take out the trash. I mean, I know these are really basic things.
Yes, gender stereotypes, right? No, but it's important. Yeah.
Right? Or if your, son or daughter turns out to have another feeling of what their emotional stability is for their gender, we can accept that as well too. because that's another
Yeah.
place later in the love, maybe another episode to discuss,
Yeah.
but that's another place that boys also are fearful to show what do they feel about themselves internally
Yeah.
on their own gender,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know?
this is so great.
So that would be, I like that what you said, you know, humanity, because that's what we want. We
Mhm.
want our kids to be kind to one another.
Oh, I love this conversation so much. And we're like halfway through my questions. I can't believe that because more than halfway, because the next, I kind of organize this based on like the episodes. And the next part is about this sort of concept of the need to be seen. And it's episode 3, which, if you've watched the show, which I hope you are by this point, because we're giving away a lot of this episode, a lot of the series. One of the most haunting moments in the series is episode 3, where Jamie is with the therapist. And, there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of dominance being played. There's a lot of standing. There's a lot of threatening in these subtle ways and showing dominance. But one of the things that really struck with me was the pleading of like, why don't you say I'm not ugly? And later, do you like me? When she tells him it's their last session, like he's constantly trying to get out of her this validation of like, well, I'm not ugly when he says that he's ugly. Or my dad did this. Well, why aren't you saying that my dad loves me? Or do you like me? Like he was hell bent on making sure that he was being told that. So he's not just talking here, in my opinion. He was like reaching. He so badly wants this therapist. And I thought it was very, very particular that they used a female therapist, right? Not a male therapist, to see him, to reflect back something kind, something affirming that maybe he was lacking. And we even, going back to episode 2, the female detective at the school had said, all kids really need is one thing that makes them feel good about themselves. Like it tied in that quote really well for me. But what I wanted to ask, about this whole need to be seen, and I'll ask Ruth first, is that what does this tell us about the emotional needs of boys, especially in cultures that still don't give them space to be vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, it did. I think coming back to this phrase, emotionally starved. I mean, this poor kid, and it's complicated saying this poor kid when you're talking about, an accused murderer.
Yes.
But I think that was the tension of the series, that you see him as this, obviously he's accused of doing this like horrific thing, but you also see this very, very vulnerable boy. You see him with his teddy bear, you see him wet himself in the very opening
Yes.
scene because he's so
Yeah.
scared. He's still, he's 13 years old. This is a child. And what I worry about is, I think in this particular political moment that we're living through, there's this tendency to kind of demonize boys a little bit. It's like, in the post-Me Too era, this whole conversation about toxic masculinity. I think there's this idea that boys are kind of almost these villains, and this is why I worry about the conversations around Adolescence, the show in general. It's like, I hope that people don't take away from this, like, boys are terrible, they're murderers, they're this, they're that, and that we're able to see them as children. And I think there was something so heartrending about those moments when he obviously was starved of that validation. He was starved of feeling good about himself. He felt that, and, I think there's also a really difficult thing in there about, that there was some online bullying of him by a girl, which is a really, really tricky thing to talk about because, obviously we talk about these gender dynamics and patriarchy and the way that men oppress women. And, so it's a different thing, and it's a more subtle and harder conversation to address the idea that a teenage girl might be shaming and bullying a teenage boy. And I feel like my own feeling is like, bullying is bullying. We need to address it. It shouldn't be acceptable in any direction. And we need to call it out, whoever's doing it, which of course does not even go the slightest millimeter of distance to justifying murder. But, I feel that boys in this moment are feeling extremely shut down. They're shut down by an old narrative, which is like, suppress your emotions, don't be vulnerable, don't talk about how you're feeling. And they're sort of shut down by a newer narrative, which is like, you're toxic, you're harmful, you're a predator, you're a murderer, time for you to shut up, you're privileged, you're powerful, you have everything works for you. And as Richard Reeves puts it, you don't have any problems, you are the problem. And I think, boys need to be seen and heard and validated in the same way that absolutely every human does.
I feel that. And Dr. Z, you, obviously we're going to get into more parenting tips because a lot of the feeling is, what do I do with this information, right? I said that at the beginning, or they feel overwhelmed. And I felt that too, but I also have the understanding that, like we said earlier, that this is not a overnight thing, that this happened. This isn't like, this is a show, right? We know that. But off the bat, like, what can parents do to create this kind of safety and connection where boys don't feel like they have to, earn worth or feel like they have to silence parts of themselves, but at the same time, not putting the blame so much on parents because we are busy, right? Like, what are some just kind of actionable things you wish parents would understand about connection and safety when it comes to teenagers?
So I think we have to also, one thing you have to remember is that we have to stop telling boys or guiding boys or raising boys to perform. Like,
Hmm.
we have to just stop
Yeah.
that. We have to teach them how to feel like they're belonging. I have so much to say on the bullying piece, and that, because I wrote in my social media when I did that, was the psychiatrist saying, Jamie saying, "Do you like me?" They're yearning. Like,
Hmm.
they're yearning for attention, through that. So belonging really initially, when we want to teach them, is not their grades or how their goals are or what they're doing in school. Are they making the basketball team? Are they, like, that's not what belonging is. It means you can cry and still be strong. I'm
Yeah.
keeping it so simple like that, and when a child asks, and this goes back to my thing with the psychiatrist, is, "Do you like me?" Which was the most powerful moment for me in the whole show,
Hmm.
is they're not being dramatic. They're not. I think
Yeah.
adults and parents and they're literally asking you for proof that I matter to you. They want to hear, whether you're, again, I'm going to say 9, 11, 13, and even older, they want to have safety as well. They
Yeah.
want to create a space that I matter to someone and I'm actually here. So I think that's one of the things we need to do, is create these safe spots for them. And I'm going to go back to that: no feeling is too big for them. Silence is important for them, so they can actually hear their voices and know that they're validated in their feelings. I know we say that a lot. I saw a video of yours, I think yesterday or today, which you were talking about validation for young kids, but we have to consistently do that. It's not only
Yes.
at 5, it's not at 7, it is at 13, it is at 19, it is at 25, because we know the prefrontal cortex isn't ready till they're 27 years old. And the limbic system, and I'm being medically in this, is the limbic system is part of that fuel and the emotions of rewards and feeling good and having someone tell them. And that's always in overdrive,
Yeah.
especially for boys. So this manosphere that we're talking about is
Yeah.
hijacking their wiring. Just to let you guys know, if we, the adults, aren't putting their emotional buckets and having that place where every child is asking, "Am I enough?" And my job is to say, "Yes." That's it. "Yes, you're enough." That is one thing a parent, an adult, a teacher, a coach, a mentor. And I like to say this isn't just a parenting job, guys. This is an adult job.
Yes.
Our
Grown-ups
kids
in life. Yes,
our
exactly.
kids are in school for 8 hours. This is an
Yeah.
administration job. Um, this is for all that. Same thing with the bullying thing. Ruth, I don't know if you know this. One of my specialties was bullying for kids in school, which I still work with them. And one of the reasons for that is that young girl. Obviously, I wish, and I'm hoping season 2 is about that. Is the story of the young girl who
Yes.
got killed and was or was the bully. Because I say this over and again: bullies are not created; they're not born. There is something going on in their situation, whether it's a boy or girl, you know that is another conversation to have,
I love
because
that. Good idea
what
for
you
episode season. Yeah, season
I
2.
don't know what it's about, but I hope
Yeah.
I wish
Yeah.
they had talked about it more, but I understand where they were going with this. But I hope that's the conversation, because adolescence isn't about a boy or girl. Adolescence is
Yeah.
about a human being.
Yeah.
And like you said, bullying is like, I live, in a school district that has this whole construct of doing this, and I'm like, it's not working.
Yeah.
We have more and more bullies or more and more kids who are doing this, but we're not looking into why they're doing it. We have no help for these kids. We're not giving them social and also psychological help. We're not doing any of that. We're just saying, take the phones away. Don't go on social media. Great. Now what?
Yeah.
That's what, remember, we didn't have all that. They went to the gangs. They went to those kids who were not giving them the right voice, because the adults are still not being adults. And they are not sitting down and having these real conversations and just saying, "I hear you, I see you, I know you have feelings, and you matter to me."
Yeah.
That's really where we have to start.
Yeah. And
20
it
minutes,
seems
guys, 20 minutes a
yes,
day.
it's
That's all
and
you need.
you talked about it earlier. You're like, at the dining table, like we are
Mm.
busy, but we're never busy enough to do this work. And I will say this flat out, like I am busy. I am very busy. Even when I was full time, like like
Pediatrician,
so burnt out. Yeah. Like
I know.
to me, this emotional conversations, even with my 3-year-old and 4-year-old, were always a priority to me. Like
Yeah.
debriefing when he had a tantrum at 3. And why is it so important for me to have a debrief with a 3-year-old? Is that these are foundational, right? This is not going to stop when my son turns 14 years old, right? This is foundational that our family, we talk about our feelings, we talk about tantrums, we talk about things that didn't sit well with us so that we can learn to process. And that way, when all of a sudden you're a teenager, you can learn to do it if you weren't already, but this is part of our life. Like we're going to continue to do this, whether I believe it's going to be useful. But this is what we're talking about here. And I want to get to our next section because you kind of alluded to the manosphere. This is
Sorry.
a term. No, this is good because I wanted to talk about this. Like, and again, we can do this section briefly, but the manosphere is not a term that I actually knew before the show. Like I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that term because I'm not with it on this culture. But you can read more about the manosphere. We're not going to go into like a lot of detail about all of it. But the show never explicitly names people like Andrew Tate, but it doesn't have to. We see Jamie's dad allude that he's scrolling through, his phone and sees videos of this guy talking about masculinity or whatever it is. So we know the influence is there. We know this manosphere is there. We know that they say this multiple times in the show from Jamie. Jamie and also his friend says it that 80% of women only want 20% of men. Like this was a fact being thrown out online in these groups, and this whole incel culture, this sort of men who are not desirable and they feel more safe with these men like Andrew, even though he's not part of like particularly an incel culture, but like he's like leading this, like you're the man, you're dominant, all of this. I'm gonna ask Ruth, can we unpack this? Do you know about this 80-20 rule? Like what is real, what is not, why is this happening, and is this also internationally? Is this in the UK? Like I'm trying to learn here because it's new information for me as a mom to non-teenagers. Yeah.
So I looked into the manosphere in quite a bit of detail when I was reporting for Boy Mom. I have a whole chapter on incel culture. I want to make a distinction between Andrew Tate side of things and incel. They're two sort of related phenomena, but they are very separate, as you said. So Andrew Tate is like part of this kind of masculinity influencer culture, which is basically saying there's such a thing as a like alpha male, that there are these like highly successful men. And if you follow me and all my rules and all of my misogyny and you do everything that I say, then you too can become an alpha male. So it's kind of almost this like self-improvement vibe, the Andrew Tates, but like in this really toxic, horrific way. The incel culture is like they have the same sort of ideas and value system, which is this like there are alpha males, men are better than women, all the rest of it, but they've given up hope of achieving it themselves. So the incels are men who like they define themselves by this idea that they're hopeless, that they're never going to have sex, they're never going to have a partner. It stands for involuntary celibate. So men literally who don't have sex, who are lonely, and they congregate in these forums. So they're like they buy into the same value system as the Andrew Tates of this world, but unlike the Andrew Tates, they never think that they themselves are able to like rise up in this hierarchy. So their groups are like
very good. Yeah.
Founded
That's interesting.
basically. Yeah. And so they are founded, their groups, the incel culture is founded very much on like loneliness, hopelessness, rigidity, and misogyny. So it's basically we hate women. Women have wronged us. Women are shallow. They're terrible. They only want 20% of the men. They call them the chads, the alpha males, these like highly successful, good looking men. And they're like, we're the incels. We're unattractive, we're short, we can't, nobody wants us. And then they get into these incredibly toxic conversations. But what's fascinating about them, I spent a long time on their chat boards and like listening, on their forums, reading their content. And I also went very, very deep and interviewed over many months to self-identified incels. And what I've found was that on the one hand, these are some of the most toxic spaces you can possibly imagine. There's like misogyny, there's violence, there's racism, like every horrible thing. It's there in spades. But there is also this unbelievable sense of belonging and connection in these spaces too. So these men, and it's one of the very, very few places that these young men felt that they could be emotionally honest and vulnerable.
Oh, wow.
So on these, 1 minute you've got the most misogynistic, repulsive statement, and then you, right alongside it, you have this like intense vulnerability and brotherhood where they're like supporting each other emotionally. They're showing up as their most emotional selves. And these guys that I spoke to were like, There is nowhere else in this world that I can do that as a man. As a young man, there is nowhere in my real life that I can be emotionally vulnerable. And I think this is the piece that a lot of people are missing, that they are finding this belonging and connection in these online spaces. It's very tender. There's some serious mental health problems among these young men, very, very high suicide rate. And I read, many hundreds actually of suicide notes written by incels on these forums. And these are like profoundly depressed people. And they are some of the most emotionally vulnerable documents. It's not, they're actually not saying, I hate women and I want to kill women. There is a part of that on this for sure. But they're saying, I hate myself. I am so lonely. I'm so isolated. And they all thank their like incel brotherhood. They're saying, thank you for being there for me. You're the only people who showed up for me. I love you. Ways that men often don't talk to each other in real life. And so this was like this fascinating paradox, this belonging and connection on the one hand, and this like extreme violence and, toxic thinking on the other hand. And I think, if there is a moral to this story, and I think there is, it's like, if we do not want our boys and young men to find belonging and connection in these toxic spaces, we need to give it to them elsewhere. They need to have it in the real world. We need to hear them. And they were, one thing that one of the incels that I spoke to was saying was that he felt like he couldn't actually even seek help in the real world. He couldn't go to a therapist. It's false thinking, but I see how he got there. So he says, when I ask for help in the real world, nobody cares about me. Nobody, they all think I'm so privileged as a man. I'm so powerful, that I'm great. My problems don't matter. I go and they'd be like, well, why should I listen to you? Women have much worse problems than you, which in many ways is true, but also everyone deserves, we're sort of somehow preventing these young men from seeking help that they need, that could actually set them on a better pathway, I think.
Yeah, it goes back to like this. It's not enough to just say, well, don't listen to Tate or don't listen to Logan Paul or whoever it is. We have to build something better. Like you were talking about what you're doing, Dr. Z, with all that work and connection, the mentorship. Do you know who Scott Galloway is, Ruth?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I listened to a podcast that he was on recently, and he was talking about this whole lack of like male adult figures, right? Like this sort of community building, this connection, this mentorship, the big brother, big sister program, like how little young boys need mentors that are males also. Like it doesn't have to be a father if they don't have a father, but all this sort of like, this sort of manlyhood. I'm curious what you guys feel about that. Like, do you think that there's a lack of good male role models that is leading to this? Or can we as females be these role models that teach them this connection and mentorship and belonging?
So there's 3 parts to this, and I'm going to single moms or parents who are, and again, I'm going to speak from what I have experienced with patients and people who've come to us, is that there is a fear factor with sending your son out at a young age with other older men or men in that who are, this is just a blanket notion that I have heard. Now, obviously finding those right groups that will help mentor, whether it's through athletics, through all this. But again, there's this fear internalized within women and moms right now within the culture we live in. Mm-hmm. Does that mean everybody doesn't do it? No. Is there a lack of these people? Yes. Who do you go trust with your child that you feel will give them the right connection? Right. The boys and girls clubs that we had back in the day, the YMCA, the big brothers, the big sisters, there's a lot of controversy that was there for that too. And we're talking about different demographics here. I'm talking about a lower socioeconomic class. There's a middle, and there is also, I'm just going to say out there, in schools now where we're seeing more and more coaches who are supposed to be mentoring these kids have actually taught them the other opposite effect to things, right? Why I say some of this stuff can start at home with moms and dads, and especially women, whether it's grandmothers, and this is because we want to give them that place that, first of all, this belief that you just brought together that they have, Ruth, is soul crushing for me. I did not know, or either I didn't want to believe it. I know it's out there. It's actually, I'm in my heart right now, I want to cry because we haven't done anything for them. Mm-hmm. And again, they've grown to be young men and young adults and don't have belief in us anymore.
Right.
And they're on these things. So as women, can we do it? Yes.
Yeah.
Do we need more men because they need to see that? Yes. Mm-hmm. Can you be a friend of a dad's and like I could say this right now, like my son has, or my husband has friends who I would be able to trust. Yes, you can do that. Moms, you can find those people too. It doesn't have to be through a youth group or through a church or through a coaching thing. There are men out there who will give the place of that. This is the unfortunate fact. We're so afraid for our kids to be on social media. Do you know the shit adults see on social media?
I know.
I'm sorry, I hate to use that word.
Yeah.
But my algorithm is, and of course that's the work I do, is in sexual trauma and bullying and kids, is, do you know the kind of stuff that's out there that these experts are putting out? Don't send your kids with people who you don't think are safe. How you're putting fear into these children.
Yeah.
I'm not saying don't. First of all, women are the best people, and so are fathers, on your gut. If you don't feel this is an appropriate place for your child, do not send them to it. But then be an adult and be in front of them. It can't be up to someone else also. You have to be the advocate for your child. And your young child.
Yeah, you're right about the quality of the person. I mean, we're talking about obviously dismantling a lot of this sort of narrative. And so if you just said there's coaches that are teaching them the opposite and pushing them into this, we need a proper vetting process, and that's not something that we may not have the time for or know until you actually get into it. So it is so much more as to the quality of the messaging versus is it a male or a female, or just to have the male figure. But I listened to that podcast and I was like, I get what he's saying, but I think, like you said perfectly, I think this is more of a conversation about lower socioeconomic classes, because we have a lot of our listeners that I believe that one of the biggest messages is that whether you're a mom or a dad or grandma, it is about what are you bringing to the table in terms of undoing this narrative on how you already said, both of you said, and all of us have said, the conversations we're having around feelings, around emotions, about what it looks like to be vulnerable, how it's okay to be vulnerable, how that you are no less of a man or a woman if you are vulnerable, so that we can teach you how to process vulnerability. That is like the ultimate goal in my parenting, is that I can't teach coping skills unless we label the feeling, right? And that's what boys are losing by just brushing it under a rug.
Well, I think it's also validation. It went back to your post the other day. Boys have to feel validated in what they're doing instead of living in this authentic world that they think they're supposed to live in. Right? It's belief that they don't have to be alpha, or if they're not alpha, they're going to disappear. Right?
Yeah.
That's, I think, I'm guessing these group chats are like, if you're not this way, or if you aren't this way, then you're not worthy of anything. Right? And I think that as adults, we must interpret that as that we have to give them worth. And worth is not to be earned. You're worthy. You are, period, worthy. And I think that's grounded in the dignity we have to give to them. I mean, again, I personally feel it has to start from home. It has to start from anybody who is within the household. I don't care if there is a man or not a man in the house. I think women have raised amazing men in this world, and that is still a possibility that we can do right now too.
The last few things I want to go over, because I know we could talk about this for another 2 hours, but then, we all have lives to live and things to do. We got to empower the future. So one of the biggest things that you've alluded to is the season 2, how you would love for us to see the angle of a girl who was the bullier. But one critique that I've heard through this 4-episode miniseries is, where are the girls? We see a murdered girl, and although, yes, she did bully Jamie online, she is a victim of murder. So we also hear a male employee in the hardware store say to Jamie's dad, like, oh, I'm on your guys' side. Like, there was this sort of, I'm on your side, their side, whatever. But even in death, it felt like, well, these girls are being sidelined. We should tell their story. And yes, she was the bully, but where is she? She was only in photos. Now, I think this was for various artistic reasons and powerful messaging. Ruth, have you heard this critique? How have you processed it? Does it mirror the minimization of what girls being largely victim of violence towards men, or do you think that it made sense for this show? Just kind of a general critique of that, because I know that came up a lot in my DMs.
Yeah, I've heard that critique a lot as well, and I think, yes, we want to hear that story too. I think we want to hear that story, absolutely, and we want to hear a really in-depth, similarly nuanced picture of what girls and women are going through in terms of male violence and gendered violence and what it is like to be a teenage girl in this moment. I don't think that invalidates that there can also be this story, which is a very nuanced, in-depth look at a boy's story. I would like to see both. I think I think it's okay that this particular story was about this particular phenomenon and this particular, in the same way that I have focused my reporting on boys. And I know many people who have done wonderful reporting about girls. I have a list of those books as well. I think it's okay to focus on one phenomenon and one thing. But yes, absolutely, I would love to see series 2 of Adolescence made from the point of view of JT and that whole story from I think it would make a great piece of art apart from anything else. But yes, it's such an important story to tell.
And I think it would bring up the bullying aspect that Dr. Z mentioned, right? I mean, we know bullying has gotten worse, and bullying has always existed, but I've said this, that I feel like it's gotten worse because you can't escape it, right? I was bullied as a child. I was bullied on the school ground, but when you go home, it's not online anywhere. You don't have to think about it until you go back to school.
A break.
And that was hard. Don't get me wrong. I really struggled with the bullying, and I had a lot of tears. I had a mom who really was supportive of me and uplifted me, and thank God for her. But now we're seeing this new realm of social media bullying that adds so much more. So that's a whole different conversation. I agree. Because the last segment I want to talk about is the parenting responsibility. I want to circle back to that because on the last episode, the one where me and my husband were crying for about 10 minutes in silence after Jamie's dad, tucked the little teddy bear and apologized to his son. So I found myself feeling something I rarely do during stories like this. It was heartbreak for the parents. And to be quite honest, I have never really considered the emotional perspective of the parents of a child who commit a violent act. But this show brought that forward in such a painful and honest way, and I appreciated that. So it stirred this deep fear, the sense of culpability, right? Is it bad parenting? Should they be held accountable? And it reminded me, which is a completely different story, but of the Oxford high school shooting in Michigan, where the parents were actually charged for buying their son the weapon that killed 4 people. And it opens up this question of what if we don't do enough, right? And so when we were crying, because we saw the father say in that scene, my dad used to beat me and I knew that I wouldn't do that for my son, but look at what happened. And I felt so powerful because my dad used to hit me. And I told myself that I'm going to not do that for my son. And I think we do a good job raising our kid, but it opens up that little thing of what is enough. So, and even you hear that he asks his wife, how did we make her? And the wife says, just like we made him. And I love that scene, as well as episode 3, were so powerful to me because you do see these loving parents. You do see these parents that were doing what they could with the information and resources they had. The dad, you could tell, worked a lot. You could tell that he was working on his internal rage that he probably got from his father. And that was very heartbreaking. So, my question for Dr. Z first is, how do we help parents listening face that just reality? Again, this is cinema, and that even with being a loving, well-meaning parent, we can miss something big. And what do we think the teens really need, like we said, to kind of reiterate, so that we can say that this we're doing our best here with everything, with all the factors at play. We can't control what they're doing all the time, but what is it that we can do to remind all of our listeners that you're doing great? Don't think that you're going to send your kid down a path of becoming, a murderer, but what can we do here and process this?
So we're talking about teens specifically.
Yeah.
Okay. You need to be reachable.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be available to them. That's the number one thing. I think as we grow up, if we're showing, like you just specifically said, that we're there, we're sitting, we're having the conversation, they've done something wrong, we've given them a consequence, now we go back and have the conversation. All of these things are being reachable. If they see a pattern of that, then they know that they're able to have a conversation with you, understand what happened in that conflict, and now the resolution is this, and let's move ahead from it, right? So that is the growth process. But if you're already a teen and you're facing this situation, first of all, there's no right or wrong answer. I want parents to know and adults to know you are all doing the best you can. We have to recognize that in itself, because the moment we forget that, we give up. Yeah. We're like, I can't do anything. I've given up. Well, even as parents, we can miss signs. We can miss any little sign. But what we have to make sure we do is we have to have these consistent conversations with them, And again, even in those conversations, you're still going to miss something. When they're teenagers, you have already passed a configuration of the point where peers are having conversations with them outside of social media. Again, I want to really get away from the fact that social media is the only thing to blame here. Yes, right. There is an access to it. Right. Mm-hmm. So I got bullied like you did. It was horrific growing up. One of the reasons I'm a youth advocate is because I feel like the youth don't have voices out there, and they have so much to say in any situation that they're in, but they don't have the right people to go to. And the first people they should be going to is the ones that they're closest to, whether it's their grandparents, their parents. Again, here's another thing, older siblings. Older siblings have to have that place for them too, because they already know what's going on. If you recognize, younger kids actually watch older kids on YouTube to recognize what they're looking at. They listen to the older kids. So if there's an older kid that they feel that they're mentoring, maybe even bring that child, whoever that older cousin is or someone, and have that conversation with them too. So I don't think we should say parents are not doing what they're doing. I don't think we have given them the right tools to give their children the right guidances. And that's the help that I think these conversations will have. I think Adolescence did a great job to say, we didn't do anything wrong. We just missed certain things and missed certain signs. And I think, again, I'm going to say back to it, is what can we do? We have to be reachable to them. We have to be available to them. Ruth, even younger kids don't think that. They don't think that we're sometimes available because mom's busy. She's working. She's doing this. Well, when you're done, we all take 5 minutes to pee.
Right.
You can take 5 minutes to have a conversation.
And connect.
Did you need something? I know you were at the office door. Can I help you? You sent me a text.
Yeah.
That 5 minutes is going to make a difference to that child.
Because Ruth, you've spoken about helicoptering, overcorrecting. Like, is there kind of this balance of like raising kids where we're not by accident pushing them towards these ideologies that we don't want them to, right? Like, I believe that that's a reality, that we don't want to be like, hey, honey, what do you need? What do you need? But we also don't want to overcorrect. So where's that kind of middle ground for you?
I think we live in this time, or most of the parents that when I say parents, I actually am talking really about moms often, that I think we live in this constant state of self-flagellation, as parents in this moment. Or, I'm sure there are moms who don't care and don't get, but I don't know any of them. Everyone I know is like, did I do the wrong thing? Am I doing too much of this? Am I doing too little of this? And, and you go one way and you're like, I just, there's all this pressure to like, let them, be independent and don't intervene and don't be a helicopter parent. And then you go the other way and there's this like pressure not to like neglect them and not to miss a thing. And I think, this kind of mom guilt, I don't think is actually like, or parent guilt, but often expressed through mothers. I don't think it's so helpful. I think, and I think you can drive yourself crazy and not actually get a better outcome. I think I'd rather see us focus on supporting parents rather than shaming parents, rather than saying like, you're making the wrong decision, you did the wrong thing. It's like, how can we support each other and everyone in our community to do a better job? I think parenting in our moment, in our sort of cultural moment, is extremely hard. We're like generally don't have a village to support us. We don't have a lot of like social safety nets. We don't have affordable childcare. We don't, so I, rather than focusing on, shaming parents for certain outcomes with kids. And as we all know, like they said, the same as they said in the show, like we made him the same way we made her. Those of us with multiple children know that, you think you're doing the same thing and they're very different. I've got 3 boys and they're each extremely different, and I feel like I've parented them the same way, even if I probably haven't. So I think, it's focus on connection, focus on building the best possible relationship with the child that you have, showing up authentically as yourself, with the actual child that you have, not the one you want or the one you thought you should have had or the one that, but just like the very real, making them feel unconditionally accepted. I think with the screen time thing, my focus has been on not letting it replace real life connection. Yes. I think it's unrealistic to just take away screens at this point for most of us, for a million reasons. And they do use them to connect and as well. I think, just making sure that it's not anything that's like replacing their connections in life. And I think that, there's data to show that that's a particular problem for boys, that they are migrating their social lives online. So there's that piece of it. I think curiosity about their experiences and just like non-judgmental curiosity. So I think, all kids, but perhaps especially boys in this moment, I think they have this very strong sense that we're constantly trying to like fix them or reform them, or that we have this agenda. And I think if we can show up with like non-judgmental curiosity about their experiences and their lives, I think that goes a huge way and making them feel unconditionally accepted. And, just that kind of nurture, correcting for that under nurture that boys sometimes get.
Can I add one thing to something you just said, Ruth, which is so powerful? Sure. I think adults and parents, I want everyone to hear one thing. You will not parent your children exactly the same way because every child is different.
Yeah.
And I want parents to understand this very clearly. There are multiple experts out there, fantastic experts like Mona herself, who give you very medically approved, scientifically approved advice. But the down thing, like the underlining thing, excuse me, in this whole thing is you have to see what your child's needs are to base how you will parent them.
Right.
I have a daughter who is extremely strong. She is very loud, like her mother. She talks a lot, and I'm proud of that. My son, on the other hand, is loud also, but he's got a little bit of an, undiagnosed attention deficit, hyperactiveness, and I have to parent him differently because his needs are different, his emotions are different, the way he talks to me is different. The way she is, they're both highly, in my mind, smart and can go out there and live life, but I got to parent them differently. I have to guide them. And I don't really like using the word parenting or raising because we're not raising cattle. We're not raising chicken. You don't have an outcome ready for this child or this human being. They will create their own outcomes. We have to give them the right guidances based on what their needs are and what their wants are and what their expectations for themselves are. And to do that, it goes back to the logic, the whole reason psychology and psychiatry is there is we have to hear them. We've got to listen to what they want to give them those right pieces. Again, boy, girl, any binary, it doesn't matter to me. Human beings need to be heard. And again, you're right, Ruth. You think we're going to parent them the same way, but they're all different. Human beings are not alike. If we were all alike, it goes back to the fact that the rainbow shouldn't be different colors. That's what I tell the kids all the time. So you guys are all different. Your emotions are different. Your feelings are different. Your physical, biological, psychological pieces are different. So parents are doing nothing wrong. You just have to figure out the way to give your children the right guidances. And I think that if we look at that and say, hey, we're not doing anything wrong, we're just going to figure it out together. Let's do it together. Because I think our kids we can learn a lot from our kids. I learn a lot from them every day.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a better pediatrician and like I become a better mom with the cycle of learning from them. And
it's true.
I agree.
Yes.
I mean, we talk about how kids are so different. And to me, it's not even just about okay, you're going to do this to stop the tantrum or you're going to do this. It's, are they feeling safe? And I think people forget that safety is not just physical or health safety, it's emotional safety. So are they feeling emotional safety with you? Are they feeling respected by you? Because I think there also is still this one-way authoritarian sort of, you do what I say because I'm the grown-up. But is there a respectful discord happening, whatever age your child is, but especially in the teenage years, and connection, right? They're more likely to listen to you if they feel safety, respect, and connection. And I love what you said, because if love feels conditional, any child is going to look for acceptance somewhere else. And I think what happens is a lot of people like enter into the teenage years or even parenting in general. I see it with a lot of young kids where they'll be like, if you don't do this, then we're not, mommy's mad, or, I'm mad at you. And like, or you pitting our emotions with our children's behavior and making it more personal. When I get it, our kids will do things that drive us up a wall, but they need to always know that obviously, barring obviously something like legal. Like I asked my husband, like, what if our son did something like this? And he's like, we raised him good. He would pay the consequences. That's what would happen. The legal system would take care of him. And I'm like, that's exactly it. There's no judgment. He literally was like, nah. He's like, it would, we hope it doesn't happen. But it was right? That our love is not conditional. But if they feel that, they're just going to start searching for where they do have that sort of unconditional acceptance, the incel culture online, where they can feel that they can be themselves. So that to me is where, make your love that you love your child, that you are going to walk them through. Let them make mistakes. Stay close, but let them fail. Let them figure it out. Like you said, Dr. Z, like we don't need to be there to like helicopter and do all this stuff, but they need to know that if they make a mistake, that they can come back to you, that you are their safe home, that you are the lighthouse that's going to bring them back, and that you will be there, and you're not going to, yes, there might be consequences because they did something, but you have to always know that they always have to know that you love them. And that's key. The last question I have for you all, which is the big thing. So we talked about this at the beginning. Is the problem social media? Is the problem toxic masculinity? Is it something deeper, disconnection, loneliness, invisibility? In a elevator pitch, like if you had to, ride up an elevator and tell a parent what they hope what you hope that they would take away from this episode and even this conversation that we're having in the Adolescence series, what would it be? What do you want them to know? And maybe I'll go with Dr. Z first.
I hope with this series or with everything that we've talked about that they walk away understanding that silence isn't always safety. Like that just because your child isn't talking doesn't mean they're not screaming inside for some sort of emotional attachment, physical attachment, psychological attachment. But more than anything, I hope that the most powerful thing is that parenting tool the advice isn't just attention, it's really sitting down and having an unjudgmental, sacred space of conversation. And that they, like you said, they can come to you for anything, and that no matter what they do or feel, that you're their safety. You're their safety net. But this has to happen consistently and all the time, where you give them, not all the time, but like you give them that amount of time you can to them. Again, I usually start with saying, start with 5 minutes to 10 minutes and giving them 20 minutes a day. Even with teenagers, guys, you can start now. They'll maybe look at you and go, what are you doing? Well, I've had teenagers say that to me. But truly, it comes down to what we've taught it. Listen to the kids. We've learned that adults stop trying to fix the situation, labeling the situation, managing the situation, and instead choose to truly listen. It changes the thought process within that child's mind. That, wait a minute, you didn't interrupt me. You didn't give me a look. You didn't yell at me or scream at me. Well, and that behavior isn't toxic to them anymore. They're not fearful of you. They're actually going to come and have a conversation with you. And I think when I talk about we're not raising kids to fit this world, or we're guiding them to create them to the help that they are leading themselves into. I think that's what listening also is going to create. And we're doing something really great on the 30th that if anyone wants to come with us, is we're going to have a social media gathering. If any of you have seen social studies, which goes back to your social media thing, it's now that next conversation, So I'm hoping that listening is what takes parents to that next step for their kids.
And Ruth, what would be your, hopeful message after watching this series and listening to this conversation?
Well, I think your original question was like, is it social media?
Yes,
is it schools?
correct.
Is it parents? Is it this? Is that? Is it masculinity? I mean, it's all of them. I think, my own little piece of this, I guess, that I've looked at and resonates for me is I think boys especially are starved of connection in this moment for a very wide variety of factors. It's kind of almost a perfect storm for loneliness and lack of connection in this moment, to do with masculinity norms, to do with the post-Me Too era, to do with social media, to do with masculinity influences, to do with the political climate. And so I think we need to, as Dr. Z was saying, I think focus on connection and building the best possible relationship with this is true for all kids, but I think it's particularly true for boys, I think, when it comes to social norms and masculinity norms and the rest of it. So I think it is focusing on that connection with your boy and with the boys in your life.
I love this conversation, and I love the take homes, and I love the insight. I learned so much about incel culture and just about, again, parents.
Me too.
I was like, that was eye-opening to me. I was like, because that opened up a lot of the DMs of like, what does this even mean? Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? And I just think it's so great. And I know it goes down to this sort of meaningful connection, right? It's not just about attention. It's connection, right? We always think about, oh yeah, I'm paying attention, but are we really listening? Are we really giving them that space to talk to us and not always fix things for them, right? That sort of, okay, so and saying that phrase, do you want me to listen or do you need my help? Right? Like teenagers love that. I mean, every human being loves that. I love that when my husband's trying to give me millions advice. I'm like, can you just listen today? I just need you to listen.
Marriage counseling 101.
Yeah, this is it. This is it. So I would love, for everyone to stay connected with you both. Dr. Ruth, where can everyone go to stay connected? Where can they get your book? I'm holding it up again because it is an amazing resource. And I am also linking the last episode we talked about in detail more about this sort of, the Me Too movement and everything around, toxic masculinity that really aligns well with your book. But where can people go to stay connected with you?
So I am on Instagram as at Ruth Whippman, 2 P's in my name, and I write a Substack. I host regular discussions about masculinity, boyhood, raising boys, incel culture, all the rest of it, once a month. If you come to my Substack, it's called I Blame Society, and you can find me there. And the book is Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. I mean, 3 times the charm. I know it's not going to be the end. I'm always bothering you, but I really appreciate.
Maybe we need one on incel culture next.
this mutual appreciation. I really love the work that you do, and I will be linking the Substack, the Instagram handle, as well as the book, so people have that. And for
Wonderful.
Dr. Z, I know you said you have an event coming up, which is actually this episode is being released on April 30th. So is the event on April 30th?
Yeah, so it's listening? Just an IG live, but what we're doing is we're, so first you can catch me on Instagram, which is Dr. Z_MD. I have all of the same on all of my social platforms, which is what are the TikTok, LinkedIn? I don't even know all the names anymore. But we also have Listen to the Kids, which is Listen to the Kids _. And that is also in my bio if you want to come look at all of what we're doing there. But we're hosting a social or Instagram live on the 30th. And what it is there is a program on Netflix, which is called The Social Studies. And we're going to go through each episode. And it's basically on the social media. So these kids were in Los Angeles and they were documented and talked about what they went through in these social medias. And there's a lot of stuff about bullying, a lot about what they went through. And it's a 4 episodes, and we're going to watch each episode, and we invite everyone to come on and actually ask questions and have these conversations live. So Mona, if you have a minute, we'd love for you to come on and talk to our, the following about what we could do with these social media platforms. And we'll do four episodes, and our first live is on the 30th. And guys, all I can say is thank you for this. Mona, you have a fantastic platform and the work you do. And Ruth, I'm about to go order your book because I have to read this because, it's important, that we support one another. And if there's anything else I can do, please let me know.
I am so grateful for your time. I mean, this is officially the longest podcast episode that I've recorded, and I want to thank you because it was needed, right? I know we have busy lives. I always am so appreciative of my guests. I know I have this platform, but I use this platform to elevate these conversations that people aren't having always. And this is the point of this, right? With great power comes great responsibility, as they say in Spider-Man. And like my son will appreciate that reference because he's a Spider-Man fan. But I really want us to elevate these conversations. And for everyone listening, I'm adding all these links, and it's so important to remember that whether you are raising a son or a daughter, or, our job isn't just to protect our kids from the world. It's to help them feel seen, and they have to be part of this community. And how are we showing up to raise our kids? You're not powerless. We matter. Our kids matter. And your presence and that connection really matter. So let's keep the conversation going. Please make sure, if you like this conversation, to tag us on Instagram. You can tag Ruth Whippman, 2 Ps, Dr. Z _MD, and at the Peds Doc Talk podcast. We love to hear what you have to say. Leave reviews, so I know that you guys like these conversations, and we can continue to bring on Dr. Z, Dr. Z, as well as Ruth to have future conversations, because these 3 people conversations are my absolute favorite. I did it. This is the 3rd time I'm doing it. I love hearing the perspective. So thank you both again so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And for everyone tuning in, I will catch you all next time with another fantastic conversation. Please leave those reviews and subscribe if you are not already subscribed to the show, as well as on YouTube, and have a great week ahead.